LBC 97.3. Call 0845 6060 973. This is London's biggest conversation with James Max.
9:21 is the time. It's me, James Max, with you till 10 here on LBC 97.3. I probably don't need to remind you that sitting in for David Mellor today, Nick Dubois MP is going to be joining, and alongside Ken Livingstone. So that's to come. We'll have some details on what's coming up on their programme in due course. Talking to you at the moment about the front page of the Daily Mail, astonishing Easter attack on the Prime Minister by the former Archbishop of Canterbury, who is Lord Carey. Now, I don't really believe that this man has been elected or voted to anything yet. He sits in the House of Lords. He makes all sorts of comments, and then he goes on and talks about various aspects of society, which, of course, in his leadership role of that religious institution, I don't have a problem with him expressing his opinion at all. I think it's very valid for the debate. However, this is where I begin to diverge. I cannot see why the church and the state can any more sit together as we try and deal with prejudice in our society, as we try and make sure that people aren't victimised in certain ways, and indeed as we try and make sure that people who, for example, want to express their religious freedom or otherwise by wearing a cross or doing other things, we can't have this joining at the hip. Can we? You tell me, is it time to separate church and state? 0845 60 60 973 is the number to call. We've got a couple of lines free into the building. If you call now, you'll get through, and then we'll try and get you on the radio between now and 10 o'clock. 0845 60 60 973. Now let's get another thought and view on this. Vicky Beeching is a theologian and academic research fellow. Joins me now. Vicky, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, of course, we'll talk about social media and the message, but I think before we get to that, what's so extraordinary is the front page headline, if you like, from Lord Carey. Here is somebody who's been parachuted into the House of Lords. He's put his views across. Do you think it's time to separate church and state? Do you think we've now gone too far and the church has become too political?
Well, I think my initial reaction to Carey's piece in the Mail was that I kind of slapped my hands over my eyes and groaned. And I know a lot of other Christians who feel the same way. He doesn't necessarily represent the views of all Christians, definitely not myself, definitely not my friends. And I do think that this kind of growing complaint that we are a discriminated minority is it's really embarrassing to many of us. And I think we've seen it step up. It used to be more the word discrimination, and now we're seeing the word persecution coming to the fore. And I just think they're a ridiculous use of terminology in a country where we have so much freedom. And I wonder whether some of that feeling of kind of, I don't know, we feel a bit begrudging, I guess, as Christians. If you look at the media, you know, we've lost a lot of the power we had. I wonder if we actually did separate church and state, whether there would be less of that feeling. Clearly, we've lost a lot of ground. We're not living in Christendom. We're not the country that we used to be. So I think maybe if we just kind of separated church and state and said, you know, everybody's equal, everybody gets the same kind of prominence for their faith, maybe that would put to an end some of this sort of begrudging feeling among Christians that we should have more than we do get.
I think that's a very interesting point, because I asked the bishop before in this question, I said, look, it doesn't matter whether you get on Facebook or whether you get on social media. Youngsters have a very different approach. I think the older you get, the more perhaps you're skewed towards certain religious views. Younger people, I think, are much more accepting of the notion that individuals are individuals and have their rights, and they don't like discrimination. There are some who perhaps subscribe to various forms, but most do not like the discrimination that's become, I suppose, endemic in our society. And until the church recognises that, they've got a problem. And isn't it the job of the state rather than the church to push these reforms through? If the church wants to remain Neanderthal, it can, but it'll do so better separated from the state rather than being dragged kicking and screaming.
I think a lot of people, especially older people, are still living in the mindset of this being a Christian nation, whereas I think anybody in their, teens or 20s would laugh at that. And I think that, I've lived in America for the last 8 years, and you look at the First Amendment and the way they do things over there, and there's a huge sense of respect for the right of the individual. And I do think we need to just be honest and say this isn't a Christian country anymore. If we say it's Christian in name, it's actually fairly meaningless, because a Christian country has to relate to the individual beliefs of every citizen, doesn't it? And if that isn't where people are at today, in this amazing, multicultural, multi-faith country that we've got, we need to actually change the label, and then I think maybe some of this disgruntled Christian feeling will go. I also think it's very worrying that so many Christians are feeling persecuted. That Comrades poll in the Mail today saying 2/3 of people feel like they're part of a persecuted minority. If you actually look at persecution of Christians around the world, there's about 100 Christians killed every month for their faith, actually executed. And you can look online at different organisations. There's the 60 top countries who, have the worst persecution for Christians, where they're regularly imprisoned in labour camps and publicly executed. So I think if we're going to be using these terms in England, we need to wake up and realise what actual persecution is like, and realise that it's really quite laughable to claim that that is what we're dealing with here, when, only yesterday so many churches were out on the streets doing, Easter processions, celebrating and worshipping as they pleased. The truth is we are not persecuted here as Christians in the UK.
I think you make some powerful points. Vicky Beeching, theologian and academic research fellow, thank you.